I'm going to read some Wikipedia articles. Self-destructive behavior. Self-destructive behavior is any behavior that is harmful or potentially harmful towards the person who engages in the behavior. Self-destructive behaviors exist on a continuum, with suicide at one extreme end of the scale. Self-destructive actions may be deliberate, born of impulse, or developed as a habit. The term, however, tends to be applied towards self-destruction that either is fatal or is potentially habit-forming or addictive, and thus potentially fatal. Self-destructive behavior is often associated with mental illnesses such as borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia. Acts of self-destruction may be merely metaphorical, social suicide, or literal suicide. Social death. Types of self-destructive behavior: suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, substance abuse. Forms: self-destructive behavior may be used as a coping mechanism when one is overwhelmed. For example, faced with a pressing scholastic assessment, someone may choose to sabotage their work rather than cope with the stress. This would make submission of or passing the assessment impossible, but remove the worry associated with it. Self-destructive behavior may also manifest itself in an active attempt to drive away other people. For example, they may fear that they will, quote unquote, mess up a relationship. Rather than deal with this fear, socially self-destructive individuals engage in annoying or alienating behavior so that others will reject them first. More obvious forms of self-destruction are eating disorders, alcohol abuse, drug addiction, sex addiction, self-injury, and suicide attempts. An important aspect of self-destructive behavior is the inability to handle the stress stemming from an individual's lack of self-confidence. For example, in a relationship, whether the other person is truly faithful, how can they love someone like me? Or at work or school, whether the realization of assignments and deadlines is possible, there's no way I can complete all my work on time. Self-destructive people usually lack healthier coping mechanisms like asserting personal boundaries. As a result, they tend to feel that showing they are incompetent is the only way to untangle themselves from demands. Successful individuals may self-destructively sabotage their own achievements. This may stem from a feeling of anxiety, unworthiness, or from an impulsive desire to repeat the climb to the top. Self-destructive behavior is often considered to be synonymous with self-harm, but this is not accurate. Self-harm is an extreme form of self-destructive behavior, but it may appear in many other causes. Childhood trauma, violence, sexual and physical abuse, as well as disrupted parental care have been linked with self-destructive behavior. See also cupio dissolvi, attention-seeking, borderline personality disorder, emotional self-regulation, self-defeating personality disorder. Here's the Wikipedia article for social death. Social death is the condition of people not accepted as fully human by wider society, used by sociologists like Zygmunt Bauman and historians of slavery and the Holocaust to describe the part played by government and social segregation in that process. This is like, I don't want to read this one. Cupio dissolvi. Cupio dissolvi is a Latin locution using the Vulgate translation of the Paul's epistle to Philippians 1:2-3-4. The phrase literally meaning, I wish to be dissolved. I wish to be dissolved. Expresses the Christian desire to lead the earthly life enjoying Christ and eternal life. Attention seeking. This is a Wikipedia article for attention seeking. I'll read the whole thing. Attention seeking, also called drawing attention or garnering attention, is behaving in a way that is likely to elicit attention, usually to hearten oneself by being in the limelight, or to elicit a validation from others. Where such behavior is gratuitous and inappropriate, the term is often used pejoratively in regard to children's behavior in front of peers or to negative domestic interactions. Enjoying the attention of others is socially acceptable in some situations. In some instances, however, the need for attention can lead to new difficulties and may highlight underlying pre-existing ones. However, as a tactical method, it is often used in combat theater, upstaging, and is fundamental to marketing. One strategy used to counter various types of attention-seeking behavior is planned ignoring. Reasons: if, as a child, the person did not receive much attention from their parents or their peers, then they may grow up feeling neglected. Those feelings will then be the main drive behind the person's attention-seeking behavior. Children of abusive parents and parents who are always absent may feel overlooked, and so the child may grow up becoming an attention-seeking adult. Sometimes adults seek attention because of jealousy. When someone finds themselves threatened by another person who takes all the attention, they may respond with attention-seeking behavior. Lack of self-esteem can be another cause for attention-seeking behavior. Some people think that they are overlooked, and so they think that the only solution to restore their balance is to bring back the lost attention. The attention they will get in this case will provide them with reassurance and will help them think that they are worthy. Narcissists are also attention seekers. They consider this attention a good source of narcissistic supply, and so they strive to get it. In different pathologies or contexts, Munchausen by internet, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, personality disorders, a sustained pattern of attention seeking in adults is often associated with histrionic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. Self-destructive behavior. It is a common misconception that self-destructive behavior is inherently attention-seeking, or at least that attention is a primary motive. Well, this is undoubtedly true. In many cases, often the motivation runs much deeper than that. Many self-injurers are very self-conscious of their wounds and scars and feel guilty about the behavior, leading them to go to great lengths to conceal their behavior from others. This, however, brings up the issue of scars being seen, which only shows others of the person's behavior, which could be used as a deliberate attempt at seeking attention or sympathy. Voluntary false confession. What's that? Attention seeking is a term that can be misused in order to discredit people who are sincerely trying to reconcile themselves with past traumas and their consequential maladaptive behaviors through others, which is necessary and beneficial when the trauma affects the personality, thus giving the impression of simply seeking attention. This is usually a consequence of extreme abuse and neglect, which impair the sufferer's capacity for healthy interpersonal transaction. Planned ignoring. Planned ignoring is a strategy where a person gives no outward sign of recognizing a behavior, such as no eye contact, no verbal response, and no physical response to the person seeking attention. The desired consequence of attention-seeking behavior is receiving attention in some form, positive or negative, from another person. When attention-seeking behavior no longer contacts attention, it will eventually cease. See also acting out, coping, psychology, exaggeration, exhibitionist narcissism, narcissistic supply, perceptive phase, internet troll, victim playing. Narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is a concept introduced into psychoanalytic theory by Otto Finichel in 1938 to describe a type of admiration, interpersonal support, or sustenance drawn by an individual from his or her environment and essential to their self-esteem. The term is typically used in a negative sense, describing a pathological or excessive need for attention or admiration from codependents, or such a need in the orally fixated that does not take into account the feelings, opinions, or preferences of other people. What's orally fixated mean? Oral stage fixation. Psychologically, Sigmund Freud, 1856 through 1939, proposed that if the nursing child's appetite was thwarted during any libidinal development stage, the anxiety would persist into adulthood as a neuroses, functional mental disorder. Therefore, an infantile oral fixation, oral craving, would be manifest as an obsession with oral stimulation. Yet, if weaned either too early or too late, the infant might fail to resolve the emotional conflicts of the oral first stage of psychosexual development, and he or she might develop a maladaptive oral fixation. The infant who's neglected, insufficiently fed, or who's overprotected, overfed, in the course of being nursed might become an orally fixated person. Said oral stage fixation might have two effects. One, the neglected child might become a psychologically dependent adult, continually seeking the oral stimulation denied in infancy, thereby becoming a manipulative person and fulfilling his or her needs rather than maturing to independence. Two, the overprotected child might resist maturation and return to dependence upon others in fulfilling his or her needs. Theoretically, oral stage fixations are manifested as garrulousness, talkativeness. That's what that one word means. Smoking, continual oral stimulus, eating, chewing objects, and alcoholism. Psychologically, the symptoms include a sarcastic, oral, sadistic personality, nail-biting, oral sexual practices, fellatio, cunnilingus, analingus, iramatio, etc. What's that? Thrusting. Oh, okay. Now we're back to narcissistic supply. History. Building on Freud's concept of narcissistic. That does not take into account feel. Okay. History. Building on Freud's concept of narcissistic satisfaction and on the work of his colleague, the psychoanalyst Carl Abraham, Finichel highlighted the narcissistic need in early development for supplies to enable young children to maintain a sense of mental equilibrium. He identified two main strategies for obtaining such narcissistic supplies: aggression and ingratiation, contrasting styles of approaches which could later develop into the sadistic and the submissive, respectively. A childhood loss of essential supplies was, for Fenichel, key to a depressive disposition as well as to a tendency to seek compensatory narcissistic supplies thereafter. Impulse neuroses, addiction, including Addictions, including love addiction and gambling, were all seen by him as products of the struggle for supplies in later life. Psychoanalyst Ernst Simmel, 1920, had earlier considered neurotic gambling as an attempt to regain primitive love and attention in an adult context. Personality disorders. Psychoanalyst Otto Kernberg considered the malignant narcissistic criminal to be coldly characterized by disregard of others unless they could be idealized as sources of narcissistic supply. Self-psychologist Heinz Kohut, I hope I said that, saw those figures with narcissistic personality disorders disintegrating mentally when cut off from a regular source of narcissistic supply. Those providing supply to such figures may be treated as if they are a part of the narcissist and an eclipse of all personal boundaries. In relationships, the need for narcissistic supply is considered one of the forces driving Don Juanism as well as underlying masochistic relationships. In therapy, a client may defend against experiencing transference love by turning the therapist into a mere source of impersonal narcissistic supply. Personal boundaries. Those who provide narcissistic supply to the narcissist will be treated as if they are part of the narcissist and be expected to live up to those expectations. In the mind of a narcissist, there is no boundary between self and other. In workplace relationships, the narcissistic manager will have two main sources of narcissistic supply: inanimate, statue symbols like cars, gadgets, or office views, and animate, flattery and attention from colleagues and subordinates. Teammates may find everyday offers of support swiftly turn them into enabling sources of permanent supply unless they are very careful to maintain proper boundaries. The narcissistic managers need to protect such supply networks will prevent objective decision making. Such a manager will evaluate long-term strategies according to their potential for gaining personal attention. See also adult-to-adult narcissistic abuse, attention-seeking, codependency, control freak, don't feed the trolls, intentionally not giving narcissistic supply, empire building, flattery, giving narcissistic supply, narcissistic mortification, narcissistic rage and narcissistic injury, narcissistic withdrawal, praise, giving narcissistic supply, Sandor, Rado, trophy wife, narcissistic withdrawal. Narcissistic withdrawal. In children, narcissistic. Narcissistic rage is a reaction to narcissistic injury, which is a perceived threat to a narcissist's self-esteem or self-worth. Narcissistic injury or narcissistic scar is a phrase used by Sigmund Freud in the 1920s. Narcissistic wound and narcissistic blow are further almost interchangeable terms. The term narcissistic rage was coined by Heinz Kohut in 1972. Narcissistic injury occurs when a narcissist feels that their hidden true self has been revealed. This may be the case when the narcissist experiences a fall from grace, such as when their hidden behaviors or motivations are revealed. What if they do it to themselves? Or what if they do it of their own volition? What if they made a movie? What if they made 4 movies? Or when their importance is brought into question. Narcissistic injury is a cause of distress and can lead 5 movies. Can lead to a dysregulation of behaviors as in narcissistic rage. Narcissistic rage occurs on a continuum, which may range from instances of aloofness and expressions of mild irritation or annoyance to serious outbursts, including violent attacks and murder. Narcissistic rage reactions are not limited to personality disorders and may also be in catatonic, paranoid delusion, and depressive episodes. It has also been suggested that narcissists have 2 layers of rage. The first layer of rage can be thought of as a constant anger towards someone else, with the second layer being a self-aimed wrath. Freud and narcissistic blows. In his 1914 case study of the Wolfman, Freud identified the cause of the latter's adult neuroses as the moment when he was forced to realize that his gonorrheal infection, constituted a serious injury to his body. The blow to his narcissism was too much for him, and he went to pieces. A few years later, in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, looking at the inevitable setbacks of childhood sexuality, Freud maintained that loss of love and failure leave behind them a permanent injury to self-regard in the form of a narcissistic scar, reflecting the full extent to which he has been scorned. In 1923, he added that a child gets the idea of a narcissistic injury through a bodily loss from the experience of losing his mother's breast after sucking and from the daily surrender of his feces. Losses that would then feed into the castration complex when this idea of a loss has been connected with the male genitals. Well, in 1925, he famously added, with respect to penis envy, that after a woman has become aware of the wound to her narcissism, she develops like a scar, a sense of inferiority. Further psychoanalytic developments. Freud's concept of what in his very last book he called the early injuries to the self, injuries to narcissism, was subsequently extended by a wide variety of psychoanalysts. Carl Abraham saw the key to adult depressions in the childhood experience of a blow to narcissism through the loss of narcissistic supply. Otto Fenichel confirmed the importance of narcissistic injury in depressives and expanded such analysis to include borderline personalities. Edmund Bergler emphasized the importance of infantile omnipotence in narcissism and the rage that follows any blow to that sense of narcissistic omnipotence. Annie Reich stressed how a feeling of shame fueled rage when a blow to narcissism exposed the gap between one's ego ideal and mundane reality, while Lacanians linked Freud on the narcissistic wound to Lacan on the narcissistic mirror stage. Finally, object relations theory highlights rage against early environmental failures that left patients feeling bad about themselves when childhood omnipotence was too abruptly challenged. Kohut and self-psychology. Heinz Kohut explored a wide range of rage experiences in his seminal article, Thoughts on Narcissism and Narcissistic Rage. He considered narcissistic rage as one major form from many, contrasting it especially with mature aggression, because the very structure of the self itself is weakened in the narcissist. Their rage cannot flower into real assertiveness, and they are left instead prone to oversensitivity to perceived or imagined narcissistic injuries, resulting in narcissistic rage. For Kohut, narcissistic rage is related to narcissists' need for total control of their environment, including the need for revenge, for fighting a wrong, for undoing a hurt by whatever means. It is an attempt by the narcissist to turn from a passive sense of victimization to an active role in giving pain to others, while at the same time attempting to rebuild their own actually false sense of self-worth. It may also improve self-protection and preservation, with rage serving to restore a sense of safety and power by destroying that which had threatened the narcissist. Alternatively, according to Kohut, rages can be seen as a result of the shame at being faced with failure. Narcissistic rage is the uncontrollable and unexpected anger that results from a narcissistic injury, a threat to a narcissist's self-esteem or worth. Rage comes in many forms, but all pertain to the same important thing, revenge. Narcissistic rages are based on fear and will endure even after the threat is gone. I think I've tried to get revenge on at least two people. One of them was last year. The other one was in 8th grade. They were both they were both things they did in a really bad way. One was a movie I made. The other was in 8th grade. I tried to get I bullied a guy. Alternatively, that's not in the Wikipedia article. That was me saying that. Alternatively, according to Kohut, rages can be seen as a result of the shame at being faced with failure. Narcissistic rage is the uncontrollable and unexpected anger that results from a narcissistic injury, a threat to a narcissist's self-esteem or worth. Rage comes in many forms, but all pertain to the same important thing, revenge. Narcissistic rages are based on fear and will endure even after the threat is gone. To the narcissist, the rage is directed towards the person that they feel has slighted them. To other people, the rage is incoherent and unjust. This rage impairs their cognition, therefore impairing their judgment. During the rage, they are prone to shouting, fact distortion, and making groundless accusations. In his book, The Analysis of the Self, Kohut explains that expressions caused by sense of things not going the expected way blossoms into rage. And narcissists may even search for conflict to find a way to alleviate pain or suffering. Perfectionism. Narcissists are often pseudo-perfectionists and create situations in which they are the center of attention. A narcissist's attempts at being seen as perfect are necessary for their grandiose self-image. If a perceived state of perfection is not reached, it can lead to guilt, shame, anger, or anxiety because the subject believes that they will lose the admiration and love from others if they are imperfect. Behind such perfectionism, self-psychology would see earlier traumatic injuries to the grandiose self. In therapy, Adam Phillips has argued that, contrary to what common sense might expect, therapeutic cure involves the patient being encouraged to re-experience a terrible narcissistic wound, the child's experience of exclusion by the parental alliance, in order to come to terms with and learn again the diminishing loss of omnipotence entailed by the basic facts of life. I'm going to pause for a second. This is a criticism. Wide dissemination of Kohut's concepts may at times have led to their trivialization. Novelle Symington points out that you will often hear people say, "Oh, I'm very narcissistic," or "It was a wound to my narcissism." Such comments are not a true recognition of this condition. They are throwaway lines. Really, to recognize narcissism in oneself is profoundly distressing and often associated with denial. Cultural references. The lead character of Citizen Kane has been considered exhibiting narcissistic rage. Am I still in this shot? See also abuse, cognitive dissonance, malignant narcissism, narcissistic abuse, narcissistic decompensation, narcissistic defenses, narcissistic leadership, narcissistic mortification, narcissistic withdrawal, psychological projection, rage, emotion, tantrum, the exceptions. Delusional disorder. Chronic. Grandiose. Delusions of grandeur. Self-hatred, also called self-loathing. 22 minutes. Refers to an extreme dislike or hatred of oneself, or being angry at or even prejudiced against oneself. The term is also used to designate a dislike or hatred of the imaginary, acting out, borderline personality disorder, emotional self-regulation, self-destructive, self-defeating personality disorder, avoidant personality disorder. Those are all things I might read in the next episode.